blood on the saddle. He became an outlaw to save an Apache girl. John McAllister had always lived a quiet life on the open plains of Arizona Territory. The sun rose early over the dry, golden grasslands, casting long shadows over the small ranch where he worked. Each morning he woke before the first rays of light and stepped out into the crisp air, listening to the distant calls of birds and the soft rustle of cattle grazing. Life on the ranch was simple, but it was not without its challenges. The land was harsh, and the work was hard. Yet John felt at peace here. He loved the rhythm of the days, the way the wind whispered through the tall grass, and the sense of freedom that came from living so close to the land. He had grown up helping his father tend to the cattle, mend fences, and repair the weathered wooden buildings that dotted the ranch. His mother had taught him to cook simple meals over the open fire and to treat others with kindness. John had a few friends among the neighboring ranchers, and they would sometimes ride together across the plains, sharing stories or helping each other with the more difficult tasks of ranch life. Despite the solitude that often came with living in such a remote area, John never felt lonely. He enjoyed the quiet and the clear nights when the stars filled the sky, and the only sound was the soft mooing of cows and the occasional howl of a coyote in the distance. One afternoon, while riding along a narrow trail that wound through a canyon, John noticed movement near a cluster of rocks. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks on him, stirring the dust and dry leaves. But then he saw her, an Apache girl, no more than 15 or 16, crouched behind a boulder, her dark hair falling over her face. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her small hands clutched a bundle tightly to her chest. John could see that she was trying to hide, but it was clear she had nowhere safe to go. Curious but cautious, John approached slowly, raising a hand in a gesture of peace. The girl flinched at the sound of his horse's hooves, but did not run. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of fear and trust, that made him stop a few feet away. He dismounted and spoke softly, introducing himself and telling her that he meant no harm. At first, she did not respond. She seemed frozen, as though unsure whether to flee or to trust him. Over the next few minutes, John learned that her name was Naichi. She explained in broken English that she had been taken by a trading post owner who had promised to care for her, but had instead treated her cruelly. The story made John's blood run cold. He had heard tales of unfair treatment of Native Americans, but hearing it firsthand, seeing the fear in her eyes, was different. He asked her why she had not run away sooner, and she explained that the man had threatened her and her family, saying that if she tried to leave, she would never see them again. John's heart ached for her. He had never experienced such fear himself, but he could feel it in her, and he knew that she needed help immediately. For days, John could not stop thinking about Naichi. He rode past the canyon every morning, hoping to see her again, and sometimes he would leave small food and water nearby, careful not to be seen. He felt a growing responsibility toward her, as if her safety was somehow his duty. His simple life on the ranch, which had once been predictable and calm, now felt incomplete. He could not ignore the injustice that he had witnessed, and he knew that he had to do something even if he did not yet know what that would be. Life on the ranch continued, but John's thoughts were elsewhere, around in desperations and temporaries into the other brown hands, repairing fences and moving cattle, but his mind often wandered to Naichi and the danger she faced. He began to pay closer attention to the comings and goings in the nearby town, noticing the movements of the trading post owner and his associates. John realized that if he wanted to help the girl, he would need to be careful. The law in the territory was uneven, often favoring those with power and money. The trading post owner was influential, and John knew that simply going to the authorities might not solve the problem. One evening, after a long day of work, John sat outside his small cabin and watched the sunset. The sky was a brilliant orange and pink, and the air was warm and dry. He thought about Naichi, wondering where she was and whether she was safe. The thought of her suffering kept him awake that night. He knew that he could not sit idly by while someone else controlled her life. He felt a growing determination to act, to find a way to help her, even if it meant putting himself at risk. The next day, John decided to ride into town under the pretense of running errands for the ranch. He carefully observed the trading post, noting the guards and the layout of the building. He spoke quietly with some of the townspeople, trying to gather information without revealing his intentions. He learned that Naiche was kept in a small room in the back of the trading post, rarely allowed to leave. The more he learned, the more urgent his mission became. John realized that this was no ordinary problem. The girl's safety depended on his ability to act decisively, and he could not rely on anyone else to do it for her. Despite the danger, John felt a strange sense of courage. He had always been brave when facing challenges on the ranch, whether it was rounding up stray cattle or facing a sudden storm. But this was different. This required careful planning, patience, and a willingness to put himself in danger for the sake of another. He spent the following weeks preparing, learning the routines of the trading post, and considering every possible way to approach the situation safely. Each night, he returned to his cabin exhausted but determined, knowing that he could not fail. John also began to learn more about the Apache people. He listened to stories from travelers and neighbors, trying to understand their culture and the challenges they faced. He realized that Naichi's story was not unique, and that many Native Americans suffered under the rules and laws of the territory. This knowledge deepened his sense of responsibility. He was no longer just helping one girl. He was standing up against a system that allowed injustice to continue. By the end of the first month, John had developed a plan. He knew it would be risky, and there was no guarantee of success, but he could not ignore the girl's plight any longer. The peaceful days on the ranch had given him time to think, and now he was ready to act. He felt a mixture of fear and determination, knowing that the choices he made in the coming days would change his life. As the sun set on another day, John mounted his horse and rode toward the canyon, his mind focused on Naichi. He thought about the freedom of the open plains and the harshness of the world he lived in. He understood that the life he had known would never be the same, but he also knew that helping her was the right thing to do. The wind blew through his hair, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant pine, and he felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. John did not yet know how he would rescue Naichi, nor did he know the dangers that lay ahead. But he had made a promise to himself. He would protect her, no matter the cost.
The peaceful life on the ranch was behind him, and a new chapter, filled with risk, courage, and determination, was about to begin.
In the quiet of the evening, with the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, John rode on, ready to face whatever challenges awaited him.
The days following John McAllister's decision to help Naichi were tense and full of careful observation. Every time he rode near the canyon, he thought of the girl hiding behind the rocks, clutching her small bundle of belongings. John knew he could not wait any longer. The longer she stayed in that trading post, the greater the danger she faced. But rescuing her would not be easy. The trading post owner was powerful in the town, feared by many, and protected by hired guards. Any wrong step could put both John and Naichi in grave danger. John spent the mornings at the ranch tending to the cattle, repairing fences and completing chores, all the while planning his next moves. Breaths. He often paused mid-task, looking out over the dry plains as if he could see the trading post from afar. At night, he studied the layout of the building in his mind, imagining the paths, the guards, and the small room where Naichi was kept. He even drew rough sketches on scraps of paper, noting entrances, windows, and likely escape routes. Each day, he became more determined, realizing that patience, planning, and courage were his only allies. In the town, John began quietly asking questions. He approached merchants and travelers, talking about the trading post without revealing his true intentions. Slowly, he pieced together details of the owner's routines. He learned when the guards were most alert, when they took breaks, and when the trading post was busiest. He also discovered that Naichi was not allowed outside during the day, and that the room she stayed in was small, with only a single window high up on the wall. The more he learned, the more he realized that a direct approach would be nearly impossible. He would need to be clever and careful. Despite the planning, John could not ignore the moral weight of what he was about to do. He had been raised to respect the law, to follow the rules of the territory, but the law seemed powerless in the face of injustice. The trading post owner had wealth, influence, and connections that ensured he could act with little consequence. John felt a growing anger at the unfairness, but he also felt a steady resolve. He was no longer thinking only of himself. His thoughts centered on Naichi and her safety. This sense of responsibility gave him courage, but also a constant awareness of the risks. As the days passed, John made small attempts to get closer to Naichi. He left food and water near the canyon, hoping she could safely retrieve them without being seen. He noticed her gradually showing small signs of trust. Once, she left a tiny note, thanking him and explaining that she was scared but hoped for help. These simple messages strengthened John's resolve. Every night, he read the notes by candlelight, planning how he could finally reach her and bring her to safety. Each word reminded him that her life depended on his courage. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, John realized that waiting any longer might cost Naichi her freedom, or even her life. He decided that he needed help, but he had to be careful about whom he trusted. He thought of a few settlers and ranch hands he knew who had sympathy for Native Americans and a sense of justice. One by one, he approached them quietly, gauging their willingness to help without putting them at risk. Only two agreed: Thomas, a young rancher with a quick mind, and Samuel, an older man who had lived in the territory for decades and knew the dangers of the land better than anyone. Together, the three men began to form a plan. They studied the trading post's layout, timing, and the guards' routines in more detail. They practiced moving quietly through the woods near the town, testing paths they might use during the rescue. John insisted on rehearsing the plan multiple times, knowing that even the smallest mistake could put Naichi in greater danger. Each evening, the men returned to their homes exhausted, but with a growing sense of purpose. They were not criminals in their own eyes. They were acting out of justice, out of a desire to save an innocent life. The tension in the town grew as John and his companions prepared. Rumors of a runaway Apache girl had begun to circulate, though no one knew who was helping her. John felt the pressure of time. The trading post owner had been angry at the girl's small attempts to escape and was likely to increase his control over her. Guards were probably more watchful now, and every hour that passed made a direct rescue more dangerous. Despite this, John never wavered. He spent long hours thinking, imagining every scenario, and trying to anticipate every possible challenge. His quiet, patient nature allowed him to remain calm, but inside his mind was constantly alert, considering every detail. One morning, John rode out to the canyon before sunrise. The air was cool and the sky was still tinged with the soft purple of early dawn. He moved carefully, avoiding the dry brush that could crackle underfoot. When he reached the small clearing where he had first seen Naichi, he found a note tucked under a rock. She had written that she was frightened, but ready to trust him. John felt a mix of relief and anxiety. This note meant that she was willing to take a risk with him, but it also reminded him that any misstep could have serious consequences. John and his companion spent the next week finalizing their plan. They decided to wait until a busy market day, when the trading post would be crowded and the owner would be distracted. They chose a path through the woods that allowed them to approach the building from behind, unseen by the guards. They gathered supplies, ropes, blankets, and a small amount of food for the journey. Every night, John went over the plan in his mind, imagining the steps they would take and how they would respond to any obstacles. Despite the careful planning, John could not ignore the personal risk. If they were caught, he would likely face imprisonment or worse. He thought of his family, his home, and the quiet life he had loved. But he also thought of Naichi, alone and in danger, and knew that he could not turn away. Rest, his sense of justice and compassion outweighed his fear. He understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Finally, the day arrived. The market was bustling, and the trading post was busy with customers. John, Thomas, and Samuel moved quietly through the trees, staying hidden from view. Their hearts pounded as they approached the building, each step bringing them closer to Naichi. They paused, signaling to each other that the timing was right. John could hear the girl's faint voice inside, and he knew that this was the moment he had been preparing for. Every decision, every observation, every note she had left him led to this point.
As the sun climbed higher, the men executed the first part of their plan, moving with careful precision.
John's mind remained focused, but he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Every action had to be perfect. He thought of the quiet mornings on the ranch, the endless plains, and the life he had once known. That life was gone, replaced by this urgent mission, this need to protect an innocent life. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a protector, a man who had chosen justice over safety, action over passivity. The hours leading up to the rescue were tense. John felt the anticipation in his chest, a mix of fear, excitement, and determination. He knew that the choices he was about to make would change his life forever. He could not yet imagine the dangers ahead, nor could he predict how the trading post owner would respond. But he had made a commitment, and he would see it through. His thoughts were entirely on Naichi and the promise he had made to himself, to save her, no matter the cost. By the time the sun reached its highest point, John and his companions were ready. They had planned every step, considered every possibility, and prepared for every challenge. The final stage of the rescue was about to begin, and John felt a surge of courage. He understood that the journey ahead would be dangerous, that the outcome was uncertain, and that the life he had once known would never be the same. But he also knew that he could not fail. The girl's life depended on him, and he would act with every ounce of strength, skill, and courage he possessed. As the market noise filled the town, John took a deep breath, steadied his hands, and signaled to Thomas and Samuel. They moved together, silent and determined, ready to face whatever came next. In that moment, the quiet rancher who had once lived among cattle and golden plains was gone. In his place stood a man willing to challenge danger, injustice, and fear itself, all for the chance to save a young girl who had no one else to protect her. The morning of the rescue arrived with a tense calm. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, and the air smelled of dry earth and pine. John McAllister mounted his horse quietly, feeling the familiar weight of his saddle beneath him. Beside him, Thomas and Samuel adjusted their gear, making sure every rope, blanket, and tool was ready. Their hearts were heavy with anticipation, and the silence between them was filled with unspoken fear and determination. Today they would face dangers unlike any they had encountered before. As they approached the trading post, the town was just beginning to stir. Merchants were opening their shops, and townspeople moved along the dusty streets, unaware that a young girl's life was about to hang in the balance. John's mind was focused entirely on Naichi. He thought of her small, frightened eyes when he had first met her in the canyon. He remembered the note she had left, her trembling words of trust. That trust weighed on him now, giving him courage but also a deep sense of responsibility. He could not fail. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would approach the trading post from the back, where the building met a line of thick trees and brush. The guards usually patrolled the front, leaving the rear less watched. John had memorized the layout, the guard rotations, and even the location of the small window high on the wall of Naichi's room. Breath had been practiced in the woods, and yet now, standing on the outskirts of the town, it all felt real and terrifying. There was no second chance. They moved slowly, using the shadows of the early morning to cover their approach. The soft rustle of leaves and the distant clatter of hooves filled the air, making every sound seem louder than it should. John signaled to Thomas and Samuel, and they pressed forward, careful to avoid snapping twigs or kicking up dust. Every step felt like an eternity. Their hearts pounded in unison, and their breaths came in shallow, controlled gasps. The building loomed ahead, quiet and imposing, and John felt the weight of what they were about to do settle heavily on his shoulders. When they reached the rear of the trading post, they paused. From this angle, they could see the small window in Naichi's room. The girl had told John that she would try to reach the window if they made a distraction at the front. John nodded to his companions, and Thomas moved forward quietly, slipping into a spot where he could create a diversion at the front door. Brass. Samuel and John positioned themselves near the window, ready to lift Naichi out and carry her to safety. The plan required precision, timing, and courage, qualities they hoped would be enough. Inside the building, the trading post owner was beginning his day. He was unaware that John and his companions were preparing to challenge him. The guards patrolled as usual, moving in predictable patterns. John had memorized every detail. And now it all mattered. One wrong move could alert the guards and endanger Naichi. He took a deep breath, steadying his shaking hands. This was no longer about observing or planning. This was about action, about putting everything on the line to save a life. The diversion at the front worked exactly as planned. Thomas caused a commotion near the door, drawing the attention of the guards and the owner. Shouts rang out as the guards moved toward him, leaving the back of the building less watched. John climbed carefully, helping Naichi through the window. Bray. She had waited as promised, her small hands gripping the edge of the sill as she lifted herself up. John reached down, guiding her safely into his arms. Her eyes were wide with fear, but also filled with relief. In that moment, John felt a surge of hope. Bray. They had reached the critical step of their mission. The escape, however, was not easy. Once outside, the three moved quickly but quietly through the brush, carrying Naichi and keeping low to avoid detection. The sounds of shouting and running guards echoed behind them, growing fainter with every step. John's heart pounded and his muscles burned from the effort, but he focused entirely on the path ahead. The canyon and woods beyond the town promised safety, but they had to reach them before the guards regrouped. Every second counted. As they moved, Naichi whispered her thanks, and John could see the relief in her eyes. He offered her a small, reassuring smile, though he did not feel entirely relieved himself. Danger still surrounded them, and the journey was far from over. They had escaped the immediate threat, but they were now on the run. Every choice John had made had brought him to this point, and every step from here would be a test of courage, patience, and endurance. Over the next few days, John and his companions guided Naichi through hidden paths, avoiding the main roads where the townspeople and guards could spot them. They traveled mostly at night, resting during the day in secluded areas. The terrain was harsh, filled with dry plains, rocky hills, and sudden drops that required careful navigation. John used every skill he had learned as a rancher, tracking, reading the land, finding water, and keeping quiet to ensure their survival. The nights were cold, the days scorching, and every moment carried the threat of discovery. During this journey, John began to realize the full weight of his actions. By rescuing Naichi, he had placed himself outside the law, In the eyes of the trading post owner and the local authorities, he was no longer a simple rancher but an outlaw, someone who had defied the rules of the territory. This realization was not easy for John. He had always respected the law, believed in fairness, and valued order. Yet here he was, living outside those rules, risking imprisonment or worse, all to protect a girl who had no other defenders. John also began to notice a change in himself. The quiet, careful man who had spent his days tending cattle was becoming someone different, someone willing to challenge danger, to take risks, and to act decisively when the situation demanded it. He felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. Fear because every day could bring discovery, and exhilaration because he was standing up for justice in a world that often ignored it. This new side of him was both terrifying and empowering. Along the way, the group encountered small obstacles, a broken bridge that forced them to find a detour, a sudden storm that soaked them to the bone, and the occasional stranger whose curiosity could have exposed them. Each time, John's quick thinking and calm leadership guided them safely forward. He used his knowledge of the land, his understanding of human nature, and his growing confidence to keep them moving and out of danger. Through it all, Nietzsche remained quiet but attentive, learning to trust him completely. The journey was also a time of reflection for John.
He thought about the life he had left behind, the simple days on the ranch, and the people he cared about.
He wondered if they would ever understand why he had chosen this path.
He knew that some would call him a criminal, but in his heart, he knew he was doing what was right. The law as it existed had failed Nietzsche, and he had chosen to act where the law would not. This thought gave him strength, a quiet determination that carried him through the long nights and harsh days. By the end of the first week on the run, John and his companions had reached a small, hidden valley far from the town. Here, the trees were thick, the water was fresh, and the area was largely unknown to outsiders. For the first time in days, they allowed themselves a moment of rest. Nietzsche smiled for the first time, laughing quietly as she drank from a cool stream. John watched her, feeling a deep sense of relief and pride. They had survived the most dangerous part of the journey, but he knew they were not yet completely safe. The trading post owner would likely send men to search for them, and the territory was filled with other dangers. Even in this temporary safety, John understood that his life had changed forever. He could no longer return to the quiet days on the ranch without risking capture or confrontation. He had crossed a line, becoming an outlaw in the eyes of the law, but a hero in the eyes of those who valued justice and compassion. This duality weighed heavily on him. He knew that the choices he had made would follow him for the rest of his life, shaping his identity and his place in the world. Over the following days, John began teaching Nietzsche basic survival skills, how to move quietly, find water, and read signs in the land. Though she was young, she quickly learned from him, gaining confidence and resilience. Their bond grew stronger, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. John realized that their journey was not just about escape, it was also about empowerment, giving Nietzsche the tools and confidence she needed to face a world that had been cruel to her. By the time they reached the outskirts of a friendly settlement, where they could safely rest and plan their next moves, John knew that the first stage of their mission had been a success.
He had rescued Nietzsche, faced danger, and survived the consequences of acting outside the law.
Yet he also understood that the journey was far from over. Being an outlaw was now his reality, and the path ahead would test him. Thomas, Samuel, and Nietzsche in ways they could not yet imagine, painting the sky. In brilliant shades of gold and red, John sat quietly beside the stream, watching Nietzsche play with a small branch in the water. He thought of the life he had left behind, the ranch and the plains, but also of the justice he had chosen to serve. His heart was heavy with responsibility, but light with the knowledge that he had acted with courage and compassion. The journey had changed him, shaped him, and revealed a strength he had not known existed. In the quiet of the evening, John made a silent promise. No matter what dangers lay ahead, he would continue to protect Naichi. He had crossed the line into outlawry, but he had done so for a cause greater than himself. He understood that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but he also knew that courage, planning, and determination could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. The life he had once known was gone, replaced by a new path, one filled with risk, justice, and the hope of a better future for Naichi. After days of traveling through rough terrain and hiding from prying eyes, John McAllister and his companions finally reached a small, secluded valley that offered a brief sense of safety. The trees were thick and the ground was soft with fallen leaves and grass, unlike the harsh plains they had left behind. For the first time since the rescue, Naichi allowed herself to relax, though a quiet tension remained in her posture. She knew, as John did, that their journey was far from over. The trading post owner would not simply forget that his property had been taken from him, and the law, if alerted, might consider John a fugitive. Every step forward required caution, intelligence, and vigilance. John realized that being an outlaw was no longer just a label, it had become a reality. He could no longer return to his ranch without risking confrontation with the authorities or those loyal to the trading post owner. The realization was heavy on his mind. He had once lived a life of routine, where sunrise and sunset marked the rhythm of each day, and the most dangerous moments were storms or runaway cattle. Now every hour held uncertainty, every shadow might hide danger, and every sound could signal pursuit. Yet, despite the weight of this truth, John remained resolute. Naichi's safety had become his responsibility, and he would do whatever it took to protect her. The first challenge arose when they attempted to cross a narrow valley known to be a common route for traders and townspeople. Moving quietly was essential, yet the terrain offered little cover. They had to move through tall grasses and rocky slopes, where a single misstep could reveal their location. John led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon, ears tuned to every sound. Thomas and Samuel followed closely, with Naichi in the center, shielded as best as they could. They slowed their pace, careful to avoid dry branches that could snap and give them away. Every step felt heavy, but John's determination never wavered. That night, they camped in a shallow hollow surrounded by trees. The fire was small, mostly for warmth, as a larger flame might have been visible to anyone searching for them. Around the fire, the group discussed the next steps. John spoke cautiously, outlining possible routes to a nearby settlement where friendly families had agreed to provide temporary refuge. Samuel offered practical advice about water sources and safe hiding spots, while Thomas emphasized the need to keep morale high. Bray, though exhausted, listened closely, absorbing every detail. She had begun to understand the dangers of the world outside the trading post, and her trust in John had grown into quiet confidence. As they traveled over the following days, John began to notice subtle changes in himself. The quiet, cautious rancher who had once measured every step with care was now someone who calculated risk with precision and acted decisively. He no longer hesitated when danger appeared. Instead, he analyzed the situation and made quick, informed decisions. This transformation was not without fear. Each new encounter carried risk, yet John found that courage grew not in the absence of fear, but through facing it repeatedly. The experience was teaching him that responsibility often required sacrifice and boldness. Their journey was not without obstacles. One morning, as they navigated a rocky slope, a sudden storm rolled in. Heavy rain pounded the earth, making rocks slippery and turning dry paths into mud-filled hazards. Lightning flashed across the sky, and thunder echoed in the canyons. John took the lead, finding the safest path while keeping a close eye on Naichi, who struggled with her balance. The storm tested their endurance and patience. They huddled under overhanging cliffs for protection, waiting for the worst of the rain to pass. But despite the discomfort and danger, John remained focused, knowing that any lapse in attention could be fatal in such conditions. Soon after, they faced the threat of human pursuit. Word of Naichi's escape had reached nearby towns, and the trading post owner had likely sent men to search for them. John remained alert at all times, scanning ridges, valleys, and open plains for signs of trackers. He taught Naichi to move quietly and notice subtle signs in the environment, such as footprints, broken branches, or disturbed grass. These lessons were crucial, not only for survival, but also to build her confidence. Slowly, Naichi began to move with more assurance, stepping lightly and observing her surroundings carefully. Each day, John saw her grow stronger and more resilient, which gave him hope that she could eventually navigate the world safely on her own. One afternoon, while crossing a shallow river, they encountered a group of travelers who were unaware of their presence. John's heart pounded as he quickly scanned their faces, ensuring they were not part of a search party. Moving silently through the reeds, the group avoided detection and continued their journey. This near encounter reminded John of the constant risk they faced and reinforced the importance of caution. Every interaction, every movement, and every decision now carried weight. Being an outlaw was not about recklessness. It was about calculated action to protect life in a lawless environment. Despite these dangers, the group experienced moments of peace and connection. Around small fires at night, they shared stories, food, and laughter. Naichi spoke of her family and her home, recalling memories that gave her strength. John shared tales from the ranch, the open plains, and his life before this dangerous journey. And Samuel contributed their own experiences, and together the four formed a quiet bond. These moments reminded John that even in the harshest circumstances, hope and human connection were powerful forces that could sustain them. However, the consequences of their actions were never far away. One evening, as the group approached the edge of a small settlement, they noticed signs of a search party ahead. Breath and broken branches indicated that others had recently passed through. John quickly devised a plan to avoid detection, leading the group along a less traveled route through dense woods and over hills. The tension was palpable. Each step could bring discovery, and every sound could reveal their presence. Yet John remained calm, relying on his knowledge of the land and the trust he had built with his companions and Naichi. Finally, they reached a hidden area near the settlement where friendly families had agreed to provide temporary shelter. The relief was immediate and palpable. Naichi smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks, laughing quietly as she explored the small clearing. John felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that their careful planning and determination had brought them this far. Yet he understood that safety was only temporary. The trading post owner would not stop searching, and the law might still pursue them. Their journey had entered a new stage, one where survival required constant vigilance, intelligence, and courage. Brace. In this temporary refuge, John reflected on the full consequences of their actions. He had become an outlaw, living outside the law, but he had done so for a purpose greater than himself. Every choice carried risk, yet every risk was worth it to protect Naichi. He understood that the labels of lawful and criminal could be misleading in a world where justice was uneven and often inaccessible. His actions, though dangerous, were guided by principle and compassion, which gave him a quiet sense of pride and moral clarity. During their stay, John also worked to prepare for future threats. He taught Naichi and his companions more advanced survival techniques, from identifying safe paths to understanding natural signs that could indicate danger. They constructed simple shelters, learned to move silently, and developed signals for communication in case of emergencies. Each lesson reinforced their confidence and strengthened their ability to protect themselves. John realized that the journey was as much about building resilience as it was about escaping immediate danger. As the days turned into weeks, John and his companions continued to face challenges that tested their endurance, intelligence, and courage. They crossed deserts, climbed rocky hills, and navigated dense forests, each day filled with the possibility of danger. Through it all, John remained a steady presence, guiding the group with a combination of practical skill, strategic thinking, and moral resolve. Naichi grew stronger and more independent, embodying the resilience and courage that John had hoped to nurture in her. By the end of this stage of their journey, John realized that their success had come at a cost. He could never return to the quiet life of the ranch without risking capture, and the choices he had made had permanently altered his identity. But despite the sacrifices, he knew that he had done the right thing. He had saved a life, protected an innocent, and acted with courage in the face of overwhelming danger. These achievements, though fraught with risk, were more valuable to him than safety or comfort. As the sun set over the hidden valley, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple, John sat beside a small stream, watching Naiche play in the water. The journey had been exhausting, terrifying, and unpredictable. But it had also revealed the strength of human courage and the power of moral conviction. John understood that the road ahead would be filled with further challenges, yet he felt confident in their ability to face them together. The choices he had made, though dangerous and outside the law, had given life to hope and justice in a world that often seemed indifferent. In the quiet of the evening, John made another silent promise to himself. He would continue to protect Naiche and guide her safely, no matter the cost. The life he had once known, the simple, predictable ranch life, was gone. In its place was a path of courage, responsibility, and action in the face of injustice. John understood that being an outlaw was not a crime in his eyes. It was a necessary step to stand up for what was right. And as the stars began to twinkle above the valley, he felt a quiet sense of purpose, knowing that their journey, though dangerous, had meaning beyond fear and survival. After weeks of traveling through the wilderness and avoiding towns and roads, John McAllister realized that the hardest part of their journey had passed, but the consequences of his actions were only beginning. He and his companions had successfully rescued Naichi, and she was finally safe for the moment. She was learning to trust the land, to move quietly, and to rely on her instincts. Yet John knew that the world beyond the hidden valley was still dangerous. There were lawmen who might search for him, townspeople loyal to the trading post owner, and other dangers lurking in the vast, unpredictable territory. Even with the success of the rescue, he could never return to his old life without risking arrest or violence. John often sat quietly, reflecting on the path that had led him here. He thought of the small ranch he had left behind, the open plains, and the simple routine of caring for cattle. That life seemed distant now, almost like a dream from another world. In its place, John had embraced a life defined by risk, moral courage, and responsibility. Each day on the run required careful thought and constant vigilance, yet it also reinforced the strength of his character. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, but he had done so in the service of justice, and that thought gave him a quiet sense of pride. Naichi was slowly adjusting to her new life outside the trading post. She had been frightened, unsure, and distrustful when John first rescued her, but over time she had learned to rely on him and his companions. She moved through the valley with more confidence, noticing signs in the land, finding water, and learning to walk quietly. Her laughter, once rare, began to echo through the trees as she explored the hidden areas of their refuge. But watching her grow stronger gave John a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew that the choices he had made, though risky and dangerous, had given her a chance to live with dignity and safety. Despite the temporary safety, John understood that being an outlaw came with permanent consequences. The law did not see the moral reasons behind his actions. To most townspeople and officials, he was a criminal who had taken property from another man and defied authority. He could not simply return to the ranch and resume his previous life. The identity of outlaw was now part of who he was, and it carried both risk and freedom. While he had lost the security of a predictable life, he had gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that he had acted rightly in the face of injustice. Over time, John became a teacher and guide for Naichi. Breath. He showed her how to read the land, recognize dangers, and move safely through the territory. He explained the importance of patience, observation, and strategy. Through these lessons, Naichi grew into a young woman capable of defending herself and navigating the world with confidence. The bond between them deepened into one of trust, respect, and mutual care. John realized that his mission was not just about rescuing her. It was also about preparing her to thrive in a harsh world, giving her the tools to survive even when he could not be there to protect her. John also reflected on the larger consequences of his choices. By becoming an outlaw, he had challenged a system that allowed injustice to persist. He had shown that courage and moral conviction could confront corruption, even in a world where the law often favored wealth and power over fairness. But he also understood that his actions came with danger and moral complexity. Some people would never see him as a hero. They would see only a man who broke the law. This duality weighed on him, but he accepted it as the cost of doing what was right. True justice, he realized, sometimes required stepping outside the rules. Despite the constant vigilance required by their life in hiding, John and his companions found moments of peace and normalcy. Around small fires in secluded clearings, they shared stories, food, and laughter. Thomas and Samuel contributed their own experiences and wisdom, and the group formed a quiet, supportive community. These moments reminded John that even in a dangerous and uncertain life, hope and human connection could provide strength. They reinforced his belief that the risks he had taken were worth it, not just for Naiche, but for the sense of purpose and meaning that guided every choice he made. As months passed, the dangers of pursuit began to lessen. Word of Naiche's escape had spread, but the trading post owner and the authorities had limited reach. John realized that their careful planning, patience, and vigilance had kept them safe. Yet he remained aware that the world was unpredictable, and that future challenges could arise at any moment. His life was no longer simple, predictable, or safe, but it was guided by moral clarity and courage. He had chosen a path that few would understand, but he had chosen it knowingly, and that gave him strength. In quiet moments, John thought about the legacy of his actions. He knew that the story of the rescue would be remembered in whispers and tales across the territory. Some would call him an outlaw, a criminal, or a rebel. Others would call him a hero, a man who risked everything to save an innocent life. This dual perception did not trouble him. What mattered was that he had acted with integrity, compassion, and courage. His choices had protected Naiche and challenged injustice, and that, he believed, was more important than any label assigned by others. John also reflected on the lessons he had learned. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. Justice was not always served by law alone. Sometimes it required bold action and moral conviction. Responsibility carried weight and sacrifice, but it also brought purpose and meaning. These truths had guided him through the most dangerous moments of his life, and would continue to guide him in the future. He understood that life was unpredictable, and that the world was often harsh, but he also knew that principles, compassion, and determination could shape outcomes in meaningful ways. As Naichi grew stronger and more independent, John felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had saved her from immediate danger, and he had equipped her with the knowledge and skills to survive in a challenging world. She could now move with confidence, assess risks, and trust her instincts. The bond they had formed was unbreakable, built on shared experience, trust, and mutual care. John realized that his role as protector was gradually shifting toward mentor, guiding her toward independence while remaining a steadfast presence in her life. Despite this progress, John never forgot the price of his choices. Being an outlaw meant constant vigilance, risk, and a life lived on the edge of society. He could not visit the towns freely, return to his old ranch, or live openly without fear of capture. Yet he also knew that the freedom to act with moral courage and protect the innocent was worth more than the safety of ordinary life. He had chosen a path that few could follow, and though it was difficult, it had meaning beyond personal comfort or security. In the final months of their journey, John and his companions began to establish a semi-permanent place in the wilderness. They built simple shelters, planted small gardens, and established routines that allowed them to live safely while remaining hidden. Daiichi thrived in this environment, learning to care for herself and the land. John found a sense of fulfillment in this stability, knowing that their careful planning had ensured both safety and growth. The valley became a sanctuary, a place where justice and compassion had triumphed over fear and oppression. As the sun set over the valley one evening, John reflected on the entire journey. From the moment he had first encountered Naichi in the canyon, his life had been transformed. He had moved from quiet rancher to courageous protector, from observer of injustice to active participant in justice. The challenges had been immense, the risks high, and the path uncertain, but he had succeeded in his mission. Naichi was safe, empowered, and thriving, and John had discovered a strength within himself that he had never known existed. In his quiet moments, John thought about the nature of heroism and morality. He realized that sometimes doing what was right required sacrifice, courage, and stepping outside the rules. Labels like outlaw or criminal were less important than the choices one made in the service of justice and compassion. He understood that his actions would be remembered in many ways, but he no longer sought approval or recognition. What mattered was the lives he had touched and the difference he had made in the world, however small or hidden it might seem. Finally, John made a silent promise to himself and to Naichi. He would continue to protect her, guide her, and ensure her safety, no matter what challenges lay ahead. He had become an outlaw, yes, but he had done so for a purpose greater than himself. The journey had tested his courage, morality, and endurance, but it had also revealed the power of determination, empathy, and human connection. As night fell over the valley, with stars twinkling above and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves, John felt a deep sense of peace,